Okay, we are live.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 Pearl Harbor Day Remembrance event held online this year for obvious reasons. Some restrictions on mass gatherings and that sort of thing that moving into this platform this year was the right idea. And so with some opening remarks, Mayor Rilling.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everybody for joining us. 79 years ago today, shortly before 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time, the peace and quiet of a beautiful Sunday morning was shattered by wave after wave of Japanese warplanes and an unprovoked attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack lasted an hour and 15 minutes. During that time, more than 2,400 American lives were lost. More than 1,700 American military and civilian personnel were injured. 19 naval ships were either destroyed or were damaged. It was the next day when the admiral who orchestrated the attack, Isoroku Yamamoto, is alleged to have said, "I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with tremendous resolve." Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that same day, declared this a date that will live in infamy and declared war on the Empire of Japan. 3 days later, after December 8th, Germany declared war on the United States. And after much debate as to whether or not the United States would enter World War II, the choice was made for our country. From Pearl Harbor to the Battle of Midway, Guadalcanal, Okinawa, the Battle of Stalingrad, Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, Americans fought ferociously to save this amazing country from tyranny, from oppression, to attempt to bring world peace. And thus, the greatest generation was born. Millions upon millions of young American men and women left their jobs, left their families, left their homes, and entered the battle, the war, to save this country. And that is why today we continue to remember the sacrifices they made. The things that they did are unimaginable to many of us today, not totally, truly understanding the horrors of war, the horrible conditions under which they fought. But that resolve, that tremendous resolve, as mentioned by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, was in the heart and spirit of every American patriotic. We now have approximately 345,000 World War II veterans still alive today. We are losing our World War II veterans at approximately 297 per day. But we must never, ever forget what they did, the sacrifices they made. And we must always honor them for the heroes that they were. So I want to thank Jeff and the Veterans Liaison Committee for this ceremony of remembrance. And God bless you all, and God bless this amazing nation that we call the United States of America.
So again, good morning. Just a quick introduction. I'm Jeff DeWitt. I am the chairman of Mayor Rilling's Military and Veterans Liaison Committee. for 2 years now. I'm also a life member of the American Legion and the VFW in Norwalk. And my career took me all over the world, 26 years in the Air Force active duty. Kind of over this shoulder here, you'll see a box on the wall. That's the flag that was presented to me when I retired in 2008. So without further ado, we're going to kind of show a presentation that amplifies the mayor's message on how the war was brought to Connecticut in a very real way for 19 families. So I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started. Presentation is titled Connecticut's Military Heroes. Part of a larger project was to document those that died or were wounded in wartime service who were from Norwalk. I took some time to go and research these 19 names. Every year we speak about these 19 people, and I always wondered what their backstory was. I knew where they were from, but other information. So it'll be presented alphabetically. First, a little information about the area. Back one, sorry. So these are where the 19 were when they lost their lives. Kind of spread out, and I'll show you geographically where that is in relation to Pearl Harbor. So when people say it's the attack on Pearl Harbor, the way I term it is in and around Pearl Harbor, and you'll see why in a second. So Schofield Barracks and Wheeler Army Airfield that you see in the top left corner, that's 14 miles from Pearl Harbor. Where you see in the middle of the bottom of the screen, Pearl Harbor National Memorial, that is the harbor. And the island just under the word memorial is Ford Island, where the ships were moored. You have Hicken Field, which was a little bit east of the harbor, and then Fort Shafter, which is actually 6 miles east of the harbor. The harbor itself, you'll see Ford Island Naval Air Station in the middle, and then what they term Battleship Row to the east, where there were 8 battleships moored. The ones with red boxes around them represent 4 of them that had Connecticut residents on it that passed away. In the bottom left corner of this picture, you'll see a compass. Just to the right of that, that is the exit to the harbor. And that's going to come up in one of the stories that I'm about to tell about how a ship captain did the right thing that day, and more in a minute. That's the USS Arizona, and that is now a memorial. I'm going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation, but quite a shocking image to me. So this is what happened to the Arizona that day. 10 Connecticut residents were killed in action on it. And as you can imagine, the gases in that third bullet that were caused by the bomb that passed through the magazine with all the ammunition in it. And what people don't know is, of all the people killed that day in and around Pearl Harbor, roughly half were on the Arizona. And those that survived, I'm sure, had some difficulty. Survivor's guilt and that sort of thing happens after a conflict like this. Let's get into talking about the 19 people. The first one is actually from Darien, right next door to Norwalk here. Went to the Naval Academy. He was on the Enterprise and was able to launch. But on his return, the 6-ship formation that he was flying in were mistaken for enemy aircraft, and he was shot down. But he survived and was actually picked up by another ship and died the next day of a wound in his chest from a bullet. His father was a preacher. He actually went to a high school that's pre-seminary in Vermont. Storekeeper third class, Harry Ludwig Carlson, also on the Arizona, only 20 years old, played football in high school, and was from Norwich, one of two from Norwich, Connecticut, that were lost in the attack. Ensign Gosselin was from Hamden. He also attended Yale University. His mother was also a graduate of Yale University from the School of Music in 1911. So he was a legacy student there. He had quite the responsibility, and I imagine he was down in the bowels of the ship when the attack happened. Just 24. Sergeant Horan, there's a book that Tony Pavia, some people may know that last name. I think he's got a cousin that's in State House in Connecticut. His cousin Tony Pavia wrote a book where he interviewed Sergeant Horan's sister, and the family was told that Sergeant Horan was running down the hangar line and was hit in the chest by bomb fragments, and they couldn't go out and recover his body, and basically died of the loss of blood. Was the only person in the 78th Pursuit Squadron that died that day. That's what Wheeler Field looked like where Sergeant Horan was. Private Johnson, he died on December 8th. Kind of survived his wounds. Coast Artillery Corps, as you can imagine, that sort of method of warfare and units in the Army were to protect the coastline of the United States. Hawaii wasn't even a state at this point, it was a territory. And so they had their weapons ready for attacks by air. And when he was on the way to man his position, he was wounded and died the next day. Not much is known about Coxswain Lanouette, other than he's from Wallingford and was just 22, also on the Arizona. Seaman First Class Lunta, kind of a backstory on him. It was thought that his brother was also on the Nevada, and it turns out he wasn't. And the father was relieved to find out that at least he had one son that survived the attack, but that other son was in Pearl Harbor and witnessed the attack. So I alluded to the mouth of Pearl Harbor and what the captain of the Nevada did. So instead of the ship becoming disabled in the mouth of the harbor, he grounded, he beached his ship so as to not block the harbor. And, you know, had he not done that, who knows what would have happened. And only 47 enlisted sailors died that day on the Nevada. He was one of them at just 20 years old. The second of two from Stanford in the Glenbrook section, kind of Glenbrook's like Rowayton is to Norwalk, Glenbrook is to Stanford. He attended Fordham University in the Bronx, and then a unique commissioning program at Northwestern to get his bars. Seaman Second Class Stanislaus went by Stanley Joseph Orzik from Meriden on the Arizona. He's one of three that enlisted in October 1940, just 7 weeks before the attack. I imagine the United States had a feeling that something was going to happen, and they expedited training. And he was on the Arizona in Hawaii just 7 weeks after graduating in December 1940, and had been on board for about a year when the attack happened. So, Shipfitter Third Class Richard Patterson Jr., kind of an all-American kid, captain of the football and basketball teams, played baseball, student council. At Berlin High School, there's actually an award given to the best athlete from the graduating class, and that award's given in his name to this day. Kind of an entry on this list that I recently found out about when I was doing this research. Water Tender First Class Stephen Pepe, at 43 years old, was a water tender captain, which are the smaller ships that shuttle troops back and forth to shore when you're moored off of a port. And they being the Defense POW MIA accounting agency, is starting to identify remains via DNA. And he was identified in 2015. His remains were shipped back to his family in Massachusetts in 2018. And he was buried in Massachusetts National Cemetery out on Cape Cod. Very interesting thing. I actually stopped by and saw his gravesite. And the section that he is buried in, there are no headstones, no markers above ground. Everything is footstones. Pretty moving sight. Can't find much about Seaman First Class George Pavesco, other than he attended Harding High but did not graduate. I'm not sure if he was drafted or volunteered, but did not finish high school. 19 years old. This is another one that joined in October and was on board to Arizona 7 weeks later and then killed a year later. I had the opportunity to meet a niece of his in Norwich, actually the next town over, and she opened up a box of memorabilia. I've scanned all sorts of things. I took pictures of a lot, and I've got it, saved in the archive that this presentation is based on. And unfortunately, Louise Quarto married somebody that she met who was going to sub school in New London. He was actually this Arnold Brick Bargain Quast, was on the Pennsylvania, was wounded, and decided ship life wasn't for him anymore and wanted to join the submarine crew. As the family tells the story, he wanted to know, he didn't want to be in pain anymore, and being on a sub and going down on a sub, it's rather quick. Kind of a morbid story, but that family has been through a lot, and they're proud of their family's history for sure. The oldest of the 19, the recipient of the Navy Medal of Honor. He was on the California battleship, and this is the citation for his Medal of Honor. In my research of these 19, I've met a lot of people that have contributed to the story, and the next slide is kind of one of my favorites. Met a fellow while researching Private Johnson from Waterbury. I met somebody that lived in Waterbury that had a picture of the actual Medal of Honor that hangs in City Hall in Thomaston. William Seeley was from Groton. He had a elementary school named after him there, and on December 7th, as the story goes, the principal would stop at the beginning of the day on December 7th every year and tell the story of William Seeley from Groton. Unfortunately, that elementary school was converted to apartment buildings, and so his legacy in the town doesn't exist pretty much anymore. George J. Smith, really hard to find information on him. Birth certificates are an interesting thing to research. Can give a lot of information, addresses where parents lived, that sort of thing. He was born in Brooklyn, and I contacted the government division of New York City to get a copy of his birth certificate, because his birthday is more than 100 years ago. And there's been some back and forth. I've attempted a couple times. I've paid a fee. I've been reimbursed the fee, and they're just not releasing his birth certificate to me, even though that 100-year mark has passed. And I hope to get that someday to be able to tell the story a little better. He's buried in Hawaii too, by the way. Interesting story about Lieutenant Gordon Sterling Jr. was not a rated pilot, yet he knew he had to contribute. If you see in the bottom right of his picture, the wings above his pocket. So he was qualified to fly, but not solo, basically. And he took off in a P-46, as the story is told. He handed his watch to somebody and asked that person to get his watch to his mother if he never came back. And he was shot down off the coast of Hawaii. Felix Stanley Wegerson from Bridgeport, one of two from Bridgeport. He survived a week after the attack and succumbed to his wounds. And the final name on the list is Ensign Irving Whitehead Jr. He went in the Navy as an enlisted sailor, expressed the desire to go to the Naval Academy, was selected for that, was a graduate of the class of 40. And there's a great story about him in the Navy Notre Dame game that year, or in 1939, I think it was. Not only did he catch a pass for a touchdown, he also kicked the extra point for his own touchdown. He was 26. So the mayor alluded to the day that will live in infamy, and that's the 7th. Well, this is the day after. And as you can imagine, there was no other reaction than to declare war on Japan at that point. And then having Germany declare war on the United States after that, well, that just launched us right into World War II. This is the USS Arizona Memorial. This is a pretty moving picture here. And I've been on the Arizona Memorial, and you'll see at the kind of the north end of this picture, that's a water tender moving away. That's what they do to bring tourists out. And any metal that or working equipment that was above the surface of the Arizona, they took it all off and repurposed it or salvaged it. The red arrow points to the back end of this memorial, and the next slide will show you what that looks like from the inside. That's a very moving picture for me. And that's what that looks like from the inside. It's 1,100 names to include 10 from Connecticut. Some Marine Corps, most Navy. So if you want to know any more information, I want to highlight a website that I've over time put together. The research started 2 years ago. I'm working on the Civil War list right now. But if you want to read more about the Pearl Harbor, those that passed during Pearl Harbor, that's the link to do that. I want to draw your attention to a Zoom that's going to happen tonight at 6:30. An author that lives here in Norwalk is Mark Albertson. And he has a presentation titled The Strategic Significance of the Japanese Attack on Pearl Harbor. He shared some of this with me way back when I asked him. And it's kind of looking at the war and World War I and World War II and how we got to where we were and kind of the one war led to another. Very interesting author, and I encourage you to email. This is an employee at the South Norwalk Library who's taking the reservations, sharris@norwalkpl.org. Give you a second to write that down. Again, the link, norwalkctheroes.org if you want to go out there. And that concludes the presentation. If there's any questions, I'd love to take them.
If anyone from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand electronically now and I will unmute you.
While we're waiting for that, Larry, I would just like to thank Chief Master Sergeant DeWitt for this presentation. Before Jeff took over, the Pearl Harbor Remembrance and other remembrances were very short, not very informative. Jeff has taken it upon himself to make it his mission to research so much, not only of Connecticut heroes who may have given their lives or lost their lives, but their stories about who they were, not only during wartime, but who they were in civilian life, where they came from. This is a remarkable tribute to these men and women of our nation who sacrificed so much. And I want to personally thank Jeff for his effort. He has really made this a passion, a mission in life. And thank you, Jeff.
It's an honor.
I see no questions from the public.
I can't believe I was that thorough, but if I was, so be it.
There are also people watching on YouTube too.
Excellent.
Yeah. We do have one question.
Mhm.
Okay, Aaron Herring, if you want to unmute yourself, you should be available to speak. And if anyone else, there's also a Q&A. You could type in your question. Aaron? Aaron, it seems like your microphone is not working. Looks like you're unmuted. You could type your question under Q&A if you like.
While we're waiting for that, I did have one tidbit of information that I failed to mention. The very first slide was Lieutenant Junior Grade Eric Allen, who was shot down. His formation was mistaken for enemy aircraft. He was actually credited with saving a fellow pilot off the coast of North Island Air Station in San Diego in June of 1941. He saw the plane go down. He landed his aircraft and swam 300 yards through the breakers, rescued the pilot, and swam back ashore with him. It goes to the character of these sorts of people that volunteered. Greatest generation, no doubt.
There are two comments under Q&A, Jeff. Neither of them a question. One from Paul Bassan. Just thank you for your insight. He was lucky to visit the USS Arizona in 2006. And Aaron Herring, I don't have the ability to speak. I just wanted to thank Jeff for bringing this day to a personal level and recognizing the sacrifices so many forget. So thank you so much.
And thank you for those kind comments. I appreciate that. Aaron, thanks for your support of the veteran events around town. Can't do it without you. Thank you.
All right, I think that's it for public comment.
Well, in closing, I'd love to do this every year. Next year, hopefully we'll be in a room in City Hall and I can put the PowerPoint up on a screen and you can see it for yourself. And the research doesn't stop. I'm always in search of adding to their stories. I hope to meet family members down the road. I know Sergeant Horan at Stanford has some cousins that are still alive somewhere, and would love to connect with them. As long as I'm alive, all these stories are going to get updated as information comes in, and I'll credit the source. So if you see anything out on norwalkctheroes.org that you can contribute to, I'd be happy to take that on. Mayor?
Again, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the people who tuned in. I see our Assistant City Clerk, Irene Dixon, had tuned in. Councilman Greg Burnett had been a part of this, as well as Aaron Herring and Paul Bassan. So again, thank you all for taking the time to participate in this remembrance. Again, it is so critically important that we never forget the sacrifices that the men and women of the World War II era have made. And not only that, but World War I and all the wars prior. You know, nobody wants to engage in war. But sometimes, as you can see from World War II, it becomes inevitable regardless of everybody's efforts to remain neutral. Again, the men and women, the heroes of our country, have say they are true heroes in saving our freedoms, giving us the ability to live a life as we live here in the greatest country on earth. So again, thank you all for being a part of this presentation.